Hello there, lovely folks of YouTube. Ren here in my fancy new hat. I am taking advantage of a rather nice day out here to talk about one of the plants in my garden. It has not been nice recently. It's been rather cold. Winter is coming. But anyway, I want to talk about this little guy right here. This is Mullein. Latin binomial would be Verbascum thapsus. This is a very, very, very common roadside weed here in the United States that actually has some rather great magical applications. There are numerous common names for this plant. Lamb's ear, some people call it. My personal favorite is cowboy toilet paper. But yeah, it's a fun little plant. You see it pretty much everywhere in the United States. It is native to Europe, but has been very widely distributed, not only here in the United States, but also in Northern Africa and Asia. Basically anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere that has zones 3 to 9, horticultural zones, this plant can live there. It is a biennial, so you can see. Actually, let me get you a little closer. We'll talk about it and you can get a closer look, because I realize that this might not be the best way of seeing it. So let's do that. There we go. So you can see it a little bit closer here. So you can see the plant. This is actually two plants. So there's a larger one here, and then there's also a little baby one right here. These are both first year plants, so they form this nice big rosette with these nice big leaves. These leaves can actually get up to about 18 inches in length. The whole plant can have a spread of about 3.5 to 4 feet when it gets to its biggest size, but you know, doesn't get very tall. Only gets to about 12 to 18 inches tall in its first year. In the second year, it will send up a flower stalk, and that flower stalk can get up to about 6 feet tall and gets covered with these really nice sort of pale yellow flowers. Some varieties may be white. There are some sports that will do white flowers, but it's most commonly yellow. And then of course that flower stalk will generate tens of thousands of teeny tiny little seeds about the size of a grain of sand. Those seeds get everywhere. This plant that you're seeing here, actually these two plants, and then there's a third one back over there. These are all seeds that just fell underneath my deck as I was collecting the seed from my last flower stalk that I had, because I had been up on that bench right up above this area, and you know, basically trying to collect the seeds, and just a few errant seeds must have fallen or gotten blown down here, and now they are growing here. So that of course leads right into my next point, which is this is a plant of opportunity. This plant is, at least this particular, the wild type plant, not a big fan of cultivation. I have tried to intentionally plant mullein in areas of my yard, and it was just like, nah, I don't like this spot. But this area here where I was literally just chance happened to fall the seeds here, it fucking loves it. So, you know, it's gonna do what it wants to do. You can always just put the seed out and hope for the best, but honestly, sometimes things just happen the way they happen. I actually got this plant through just wild happenstance, where the plant just appeared in my front yard one year. In a flower bed that I had cultivated for something else. I got a mullein plant, and I was like, okay, let's roll with this. And that's where the seeds that eventually turned into these plants came from. So this plant does prefer full sun, which is kind of interesting that it's here, because this is not a full sun place, but it seems to be happy enough here. So I would say full sun to part shade. Probably does better in full sun, but obviously this one likes being in part shade. So, so there you go. This plant is not a big fan of transplanting. It can be done, but it's not a big fan of it. Needs to be babied through that process pretty heavily. Now there are some new cultivars that are making their way out into the trade market with hybrids of mullein and, you know, other related species that will have multicolored flowers and stuff. I'm sorry. Hello. We have a visitor. Hi, I've never seen you before. Anyway, I'm going to take a break and pet this cat, so we'll come back in a second. Okay, well, that cat is still wandering around. I don't know whose cat that is. It definitely belongs to somebody. It has a collar on. So, maybe a new neighbor. I don't know. But anyway, cat seems very nice. Wandering off somewhere, a little skittish, you know. But anyway, very distracting though. Let's see, where did we leave off? Let me think. We were talking about the hybridization of this plant. So yes, I have seen some plants being sold in the, actual, like, trade magazines and the like. Places like Bluestone has had them recently, that they're hybridized cultivars that will have other colors besides yellow and white, like usually in like the fuchsia range and stuff like that. I haven't grown those. They look very nice, but I find that I get plenty just from these. Hi, welcome back. Now, these plants for me, here where I am, usually bloom around the summer solstice. It is a very notable occurrence, particularly because these tend to grow along the side of the highways here, and you'll just see rows and rows and rows of these really, really tall, almost like yellow candles of flowers growing along the roadside. Those flowers, of course, eventually do turn into the flower stalks, like I mentioned, that dry out and can be used for magical application that we'll talk about in a little bit. This is a plant that is typically associated with Saturn, but also has some Mars and fire applications. So it is very Saturnian in how it's usually just rooted in one place. It doesn't like to be moved around. When it's there, it's there. Don't move it, it will die. That's a very Saturnian aspect of the plant. Plants that make a rosette, also sometimes have, that biennial, like, kind of going down in the underworld and coming back aspect has a bit of a Saturnian feel to it as well. But the Mars and fire aspects are definitely there. This plant has a lot of associations with fire. One of the things I mentioned, I do still have this. It's broken, unfortunately. It got broken before I could use it, but this is what the flower stalk looks like when it's dry. You can see this one's rather long. This one only got up to about 4 feet, which is not as tall as they can get. This little portion here this is what they call a hag's taper. You can actually dip this in wax or fat, and then light it like a candle, and it will burn and light, sort of like almost like a natural tiki torch. And this was said to be used to attract spirits on Samhain, used to light the way to the Sabbats, things like that, which is why it's called the hag's taper. So that is a definite fire association that this plant has, being used for or torch. The dried flowers, and even just on the stalk, have this like fluff on them that is highly flammable. When these flowers are dry, when these leaves are dried or the flower stalks are dried, they are very flammable, and they can be used as a fire starter, which is another fire association with this. Also, the fuzz on these plants can be kind of irritant as well, which is why it gets that sort of Mars association with it, that sort of protective aspect. We can kind of see this as not just being protective, but also kind of neutralizing, putting things down into the ground with that journey down into the underworld that it takes as a biennial. Now, of course, one of the most interesting and possibly useful uses for this plant is that the dried and powdered leaves of mullein are commonly used as a substitute for graveyard dirt. So if you don't have access to a graveyard where you can get some dirt, this might be a good substitute for you. And like I said, it is fairly easy to grow if it wants to grow. Oh, you're gonna let me pet you finally. It can be kind of fussy about when it will grow. And those seeds, if you do plant them, just be warned, they can lie dormant in the soil for several years. So, in fact, it was about 2 years before these actually sprouted up. So, just be warned that just because you've planted a mullein seed somewhere doesn't mean, and it didn't grow that year, doesn't mean that you won't have mullein. So, keep that in mind. I think that's all I have on this plant. It's a fun little plant. It kind of does its own thing. It's actually very nice. It has a really soft feel to it. If you rub it enough, it can get kind of, those little hairs can eventually be irritating to your skin. But if you're gentle with it, then it's gentle back. And I think that's one of the really core messages of this plant is that, it's like If you're fine and you're nice, this plant will be nice. But if you rub it the wrong way, it's going to rub you right back. So very protective in that aspect. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I hope this video finds you well, and I will see you again soon.